Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going deep, into
Yeah.
a journey in service. This is the autobiography of Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida,
Okay.
or as many people know him, IBB,
Right.
Nigeria's former military president.
Yes.
So we're
Yeah.
going to unpack his life journey from his early days
Yeah.
all the way to leading a nation
Okay.
through some pretty complex times.
Right.
And hey, if you enjoy these deep dives,
Yeah.
check out more book reviews on the Foresight Technologies Innovation Hub YouTube channel.
Right.
That's right.
So let's jump right into it.
Okay.
IBB's story, I think, offers a very, very unique lens on Nigeria's evolution
Okay.
from colonial times
Yeah.
through those years after independence.
Right.
It's not just about a political figure,
Right.
but a man who was kind of formed by the events of his time.
Right. So let's start with young IBB in Minna.
Okay.
So his father's name was Badamasi,
Hmm.
and that was after a cherished religious book.
Interesting.
And his grandfather was a prominent Muslim cleric.
Okay.
Imagine being named after a book.
Wow.
Talk about some pressure to be a scholar.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, and
How-
geographically,
yeah.
his education in Baida adds another layer here. So this town, Baida, wasn't just an ancient New Kingdom capital,
Okay.
but it was closely tied to Zungeru,
Oh, right.
which was the early colonial capital of northern Nigeria.
Wow.
So he was literally surrounded by history.
Talk about setting the stage.
Right.
So even as a student,
Yeah.
there's this great story about IBB leading a rebellion
Oh, really?
because the senior students were allowed to sleep outside during the Baida heat.
Oh, wow.
But the juniors had to stay inside.
Oh, my God.
He felt it was unfair
Yeah.
and took action.
That's great.
Um,
Even despite his mischievous side, though,
yeah.
he had a deep love for English literature,
Real.
which was instilled by a teacher named Mr. Bill.
Interesting.
It makes you wonder how different his path might have been had he pursued that.
That's true.
You know?
Yeah, life throws curveballs
It does.
and puts you on unexpected paths.
For sure.
And speaking of those paths,
Yeah.
we can't forget IBB's military career.
Of course not.
From the Nigerian Military Training College to training in India,
Wow.
the UK, and the US.
That sounds
He really was a bright and driven officer.
Yeah.
And all of this was happening during a period of intense change in Nigeria.
Exactly.
So the nation had just gained independence,
Right.
but political instability was brewing.
Yeah.
And then the first military coup in 1966, led by Major Nzeopru,
Right.
really shook things up.
It did.
So this is where IBB's story takes a darker turn.
Okay.
He was now a young officer
Yeah.
and saw the tragic effects of that coup.
Yeah.
The assassination of Sir Amadou Bello,
Right.
a revered leader in northern Nigeria,
Yes.
had a profound impact on him.
I bet.
It must have been a real turning point for IBB.
Absolutely.
You know, the January 1966 coup,
Yeah.
while aiming for change,
Yeah.
also became really entangled with ethnic tensions
Yeah.
and targeted killings of leaders,
Yeah.
mostly from northern and western Nigeria,
Right.
fueled a really bad cycle of violence and mistrust.
Yeah.
And it set a dangerous precedent, for sure.
I did.
Sadly, it led to the counter-coup
Right.
in July of that same year.
Wow, that same year?
IBB actually describes the chaos and the bloodshed.
Yeah.
He even shares a story about his friend Samuel Ogbamudia
Okay.
narrowly avoiding becoming a victim
Oh, wow.
of Lieutenant Bukar Dimka's actions during this crazy time.
So the counter-coup brought General Yakubu Gowon to power.
That's right.
But unfortunately, it deepened the country's divisions
Yeah.
and ultimately led to the Nigerian Civil War.
A truly devastating chapter
Absolutely.
in Nigeria's story. So the Civil War was brutal.
It was.
IBB writes about being wounded
Oh, wow.
by a biofan shell.
Oh, my God.
And it really paints this picture of how intense and dangerous it was.
Absolutely.
It wasn't just politics.
Yeah.
It was life or death
Right.
for so many people.
Yeah, the scars from that war are long-lasting,
Yeah.
both for the soldiers who fought
Right.
and the civilians who were caught in the crossfire.
Right.
And the Igbos, who had fought for succession,
Yeah.
faced this really complex issue of marginalization after the war ended.
It's a complex
Yeah.
and difficult thing to
I
think
guess
about.
it is.
But in the middle of all this turmoil,
Yeah.
there's also a personal story here.
Okay.
IBB met and married his wife, Miriam,
During the war.
during this really difficult time.
Wow.
And it shows their love and resilience.
It does.
He even highlights his commitment to monogamy,
Okay.
believing that it was crucial for a stable family life.
Yeah, it's a reminder that even in the darkest of times,
Yeah,
life goes on.
it does.
Right.
And after the war,
Yeah.
IBB played a role in the rehabilitation efforts
Okay.
in Umuahia,
All right.
showcasing this immense challenge of rebuilding a nation
Yeah.
that had been torn apart.
It's not just about the physical rebuilding, but also healing those deep wounds and divisions.
That's right.
Yeah.
So then we see IBB as an instructor
Okay.
at the Nigerian Defense Academy,
All right.
training future military leaders
Wow.
like David Mark and others.
Mm.
And this was all during Gowon's rule, right?
Yes. This was a period marked by the oil boom,
Right.
major infrastructure development,
Yep.
and also the controversial indigenization decree.
Okay.
So this decree basically mandated that certain businesses in Nigeria
Right.
had to be at least partially owned by Nigerians.
Okay.
The goal, I think, was to increase local participation in the economy.
Okay.
It had a really significant impact, shaping the economic landscape for years to come.
So it wasn't just about military matters for IBB at this point.
Right. He was involved in shaping economic policy as well.
It seems like a natural progression considering his role at the academy.
Yeah, it does. And then came the 1975 coup,
Okay.
which brought Murtala Muhammad to power.
Right.
IBB played a role in this change of leadership.
Okay.
And it's very clear that Murtala's ambitious reforms and decisive style
Yeah.
really had an impact on him.
Okay.
He was seeing strong leadership up close,
Right.
both the good and the bad.
Yeah, it's like each experience was adding another layer
It was.
to his understanding of leadership
Yeah.
and the complexities of power.
Totally.
But then tragedy struck again
Oh, no.
with the Dimbita coup attempt in 1976.
Right.
IBB actually describes his tense encounter
Yeah.
with Dimka at Radio House
Okay.
and how he managed to, like, diffuse the situation, thinking
Wow.
really quickly on his feet.
Oh, my gosh.
He's right in the middle of it all.
He was there.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, this coup attempt resulted in the assassination of Murtala Muhammad,
Right.
a leader who had a lot of promise for a brighter future.
It must have been devastating.
It was a huge blow,
Yeah.
both personally for IBB
Yeah.
and for the nation as a whole.
Yeah. And then came the aftermath,
Right.
which brought about the controversial treason and other offenses decree, which raised so many questions
It
about
did.
retroactive laws and the balance between security and individual rights.
Right. It was a tense time.
A very tense time.
Yeah, and it's interesting that IDB, despite being involved in multiple coups,
Yeah.
actually argues that they're sometimes necessary to address failings in civilian governments
Right.
and to safeguard national unity.
It's a controversial viewpoint.
It is.
But it does reflect how complex his perspective is.
It does. It makes you think
Yeah, it does.
about what it must have been like to be in those situations.
Yeah, it's easy to judge from the outside.
Right.
But being in those situations must have been so incredibly challenging.
Absolutely.
So this all leads us to IBB's rise to the presidency in 1985.
Right.
He says that he felt compelled to take over
Okay.
because of the economic crisis and the divisions within the military.
Okay.
He saw it as a necessary step at the time.
His initial actions, though, were quite different from his
Okay.
predecessors.
Okay.
So he reviewed and repealed some of the more, harsh decrees that were in place.
Okay.
He engaged with different political and traditional leaders.
Okay.
And he projected this more inclusive and dialogue-driven approach.
Okay.
It was a noticeable shift in tone.
Okay. So then came his decision to engage with the IMF
Yes.
and implement the controversial Structural Adjustment Program,
Right.
or SAP.
Yes.
He actually stresses that he wanted open public debate and transparency around this major economic reform.
So SEP, though, wasn't without its problems, right?
That's right. SAP had both positive and negative consequences.
Yeah.
It brought about bank reforms and privatization,
Right.
but it also resulted in hardship for many Nigerians
Yeah.
with rising inflation and job losses.
Yeah. It was a tough time for a lot of people.
Yeah, it was a double-edged sword.
It was.
And public protests erupted against SAP.
Yeah.
Highlighting how complex economic reforms can be
Right.
and the challenges of balancing competing interests.
Right. Trying to do what you think is best for the country
Yeah.
while also understanding that there will be people who are negatively impacted.
Absolutely.
It's a classic example of the trade-offs
Yeah.
involved in trying to improve a nation's economy.
For sure.
Yeah, it really highlights, trying to balance those immediate needs with those longer-term goals.
Right.
And it's interesting how IBB responds to all the criticism, so he doesn't abandon SAP,
Okay.
but he recognizes that something needs to be done
Right.
to kind of lessen the negative impacts.
Yeah.
And that leads to the creation of institutions
Okay.
like the People's Bank, community banks,
Okay.
and the DFRRI's
The what?
Directorate of Food, Roads, and Rural Infrastructure.
Okay, so he was trying to create like safety nets
Exactly.
to help people out.
Especially for those rural communities
Right.
who were hit hardest by the changes.
Right. It's like he understood the human costs of these reforms
He did.
and was really trying to do something about it.
And he also establishes MAMSR.
MAMSR.
Yes, Mass Mobilization for Social Justice and Economic Recovery.
Oh, okay.
Which was focused on grassroots mobilization and social change.
It sounds like he was really trying to balance these different forces, the economics and the social impact.
Yeah, it must have been a tough balancing act.
It must have been. So now shifting gears a bit.
Yeah.
Let's look at IBB's foreign policy.
Okay.
One of his key principles was Pan-Africanism, supporting liberation movements, and engaging in regional conflicts, like the Liberian crisis.
So his approach was this blend of idealism and pragmatism.
Okay.
He really advocated for Africa's interests on the world stage.
Okay.
But he also understood that he had to navigate complex situations.
Right.
A good example is Nigeria's relationship with Israel.
Okay.
It was a really delicate balancing act.
Yeah.
He had to consider ideologies and sectarian issues alongside the national interests.
Yeah, it's interesting how he had to juggle all those things.
He did. And then you have this amazing story about Nigeria successfully hosting the OAU summit in Abuja in 1991. Despite a super tight deadline and economic troubles.
Really?
They had to build a massive conference center.
Wow.
A new highway.
Wow.
And even get a bunch of limousines through this oil barter arrangement.
Talk about pulling it all together.
It was a major achievement. Showing Nigeria's leadership in Africa and IBB's ability to make things happen.
On a grand scale.
Yeah. But of course, nobody's perfect.
Yeah, no leader's journey is without its bumps in the road.
Right. And for IBB, one of the most defining moments was the annulment of the June 12, 1993 elections.
This is where things get really complicated.
They do.
The June 12 elections were widely considered to be free and fair.
Okay.
And they were won by MKO Abiola. But the results were annulled, leading to a lot of political turmoil and protests.
Yeah, it's still a highly debated event.
It is.
To this day.
There are a lot of different perspectives and theories.
Right. It was a huge turning point for Nigeria.
Yeah.
Why do you think it still resonates so strongly today?
I think it's because people felt like a promise had been broken. People felt their voices were heard.
Yeah.
They felt like they participated in a fair process.
Yeah.
And then to have it taken away,
yeah,
it created a sense of disillusionment and distrust that lasted for a really long time.
That's a really insightful point.
And in the aftermath, Sani Abacha, who would later seize power, emerged.
Right.
IBB claims that he felt betrayed by Abacha, someone he had considered a friend and trusted ally.
It just goes to show you, even at the highest levels, personal relationships and political maneuvering are often intertwined.
Right. And betrayal can really hurt.
It can.
Especially from someone you think you can count on.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that power dynamics are complex.
Right.
And they can shift unexpectedly.
So shifting gears one more time.
Okay.
Let's talk about IBB's personal life a bit.
Okay.
He speaks about his enduring marriage to Mariam.
Right.
And her significant work with the Better Life program.
Right.
Which was aimed at empowering rural women.
Mariam played a really crucial role.
She did.
She went above and beyond what was expected of a first lady at the time.
Yeah.
And she really worked to improve the lives of women in Nigeria.
So the Better Life program focused on self-reliance and income generation.
Right. It wasn't just about handouts.
Right.
It was about giving them the tools to succeed.
Giving women the tools and opportunities to improve their lives.
And their communities.
And their communities, yeah.
Exactly. It was about sustainability and empowerment.
And it left a lasting impact on women's empowerment in Nigeria.
It did, and it's interesting to consider how Mariam's work might have influenced IBB's thinking about social development and women's roles in society.
It really makes you wonder.
Yeah, they were partners in many ways, both navigating the political landscape and working to create change.
Yeah, so as we wrap up our deep dive, it's clear that IBB's life and his legacy are complex.
Yeah.
He was a skilled military strategist and a shrewd politician, someone who really championed economic reform and Pan-Africanism.
He's a complicated guy.
But he was also involved in coups and the annulment of a democratic election and a period of political instability.
Yeah, he's a tough one to figure out.
He is a complex figure.
Yeah.
You know, he could inspire hope and generate controversy at the same time.
He could.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is.
And it's fascinating to see how these different parts of him played out on the national stage.
It is. It's a reminder that leadership is rarely straightforward.
Right.
Especially in a country as complex as Nigeria.
Yeah, it's a reminder that history is never really black and white.
Right. There are so many shades of gray.
So many.
Especially when it comes to leadership and the decisions that shape a nation.
Yeah, and I think IBB's story encourages us
It does.
to think about those complexities.
Yeah.
And to resist easy answers.
Yeah, dig deeper.
Yeah, dig in and really understand the nuances of his actions and the consequences of those actions.
And the impact they had, both the intended and the unintended consequences.
So for you, dear listener, we encourage you to explore IBB's story further.
Absolutely.
Maybe even read his autobiography.
Yeah.
And come to your own conclusions.
It's a fascinating story.
It is.
And it's a reminder that history isn't just about dates and names.
Right.
It's about real people who lived through those times and the choices they made.
And the impact those choices had.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's not just about understanding the past, but understanding the present and the challenges that Nigeria faces today.
Well said.
So we want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
We appreciate you being here.
Into the life and times of Ibrahim Babangida.
Absolutely.
I hope you found it insightful.
Yeah, thought-provoking, and maybe even a little bit surprising.
Yeah, for sure. And before we go, don't forget to become a part of our community.
Yes, join us.
Like this episode.
Yeah.
Share it with your friends.
Tell everyone.
And subscribe to the channel.
So you don't miss out on future deep dives.
That's right. What book should we tackle next?
Ooh, good question.
Let us know in the comments below.
Yes, we're always looking for interesting stories to explore.
So until next time, happy reading.
Yes, keep those minds curious.
And keep those minds curious.